Tēnā koutou katoa. No tamaki makoto aho ko Louise Lahat tēnei. I'm the chair of the LIANZA Committee on Freedom of Information, and presenting with me today is fellow committee member Marlies Zip van der Laan. The committee and a wider review group from the LIANZA and SLANZA community have prepared this toolkit to help librarians be prepared in a world of increasing challenge and division, so that libraries can continue to hold their place as defenders of the freedom to read, with all the benefits that this endows on those with that freedom. Thank you for your interest in attending the session to learn more, and I hope you will be inspired to go forth and tell others about this resource and become champions. Okay. I hope you will be inspired to go forth and tell others about this resource and become champions in your own communities, workplaces, and lives. Ngā mihi nui. I'm going to go over what the toolkit covers and how you can use it, showing you the toolkit website. Marlies will then hone in on the key policies, processes, and activities the toolkit will help you establish, and we'll have time for questions. Later in the year, there'll be more webinars with guest speakers focusing on the legal and ethical framework, including the role of the Classification Office, and also the challenge of disputed or disinformation, and how libraries can honour Te Tiriti and Moturongo Māori and Te Reo within their collections and services. But firstly, let us put aside our mahi and other distractions by joining together with a karakia. Kia tau te rangimārie kia tātou katoa. Ka piki te kaha, ka piki te ora, ka piki te maramatanga. Homi e, hui e, taiki e. Now we're going to go to the toolkit. Which you should now see on your screen. This is the toolkit on the LIANZA website, which you can either find by going directly to the website or, of course, by using any search. Okay, so here we have the toolkit, and I'm just going to show you through it. There is quite a lot of content there, so we're just going to whiz through it and hope that you'll go back and look. So we start with talking about why you might need the toolkit and why you need to be prepared. And there are lots of places on the website where you can click for further information. So here's an example, further information around challenge topics. So these are some of the things that are most challenged in Aotearoa at the moment. And we've got two quite lengthy case studies here, one about rainbow and Takatapui community challenges, which we are seeing. And we've got this sort of background, what's happening in the United States, what's happening here, why people might be challenging it, what sort of things the libraries might experience. And then we also have one on mis and disinformation and controversial works in library collections, which is also something that quite a few libraries are experiencing. So this goes through Te Tiriti o Waitangi and how that can help us, and suggests ways that libraries could respond. And it gives some resources all through here. So quite often there are links to take you to other resources, both local and international. And we've got that case study there about TROS publishing. Back from the home page, then we've got what is a challenge. So that's helpful information about why people might challenge, but also really reasserting that people have the right to challenge content they think will do harm, but what we can do as libraries. Then we get to this part of the toolkit, which is really got the majority of the content in there. So these are all little essays or mini toolkits around specific areas to help you. So the legal framework talks about the governance of our libraries in New Zealand and how that affects challenges. The legal framework we work in, so Te Mana Whakatu Classification Office, the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act and Human Rights Act, which also guide libraries and what they need to do. Te Tiriti o Waitangi, of course, in New Zealand, and what that might mean for us. And we've got information about other statements that might be useful as a background to the values and ethics behind libraries really defending the freedom to read. We've got update your policies, and Marlies is going to be looking at this, so there'll be more detail around that, but this is the policies that you need to establish. They're going to help you be prepared. And likewise with processes, there's a lot of detail here about what to do when you get a complaint, what you might need to set up, statements to have ready, and how to handle complaints, social media, etc. And also things other than books. So Marlies will be going over that in more detail. We've got some other useful resources, statements, both local and overseas, some examples of policies that you can look at if you're updating yours. We've got a section on knowing what you should know in order to keep up to date and to be not just reactive to challenges, but also proactive in promoting the freedom to read. And we have a section called Who Are the Players? This goes into who might be involved in a challenge or in the freedom to read, including all the library people, managers, frontline staff, the organisations that we work for, councils and schools, the organisations that can help support, like the library associations and school library service, but also who the challenges might be, both groups and individuals, and others who have an interest, such as the media and publishers and authors. And what this tries to do is say, well, these people might have an interest, what their interest is in these issues, what their role might be, and what are some of the things we might do as librarians to respond to that. Next, we have these key messages. This is designed as something you can print out and have on hand for frontline staff or anyone who might have to deal suddenly with a complaint, or to share with your organisation, or even the media. And then we have some quick guides. Again, these are designed to be printed out, and they're designed to focus on the particular roles, because there are different roles that we might have in this whole process. So the first one for public library managers, what they need to do, it has the role, and also, again, some examples and case studies that can be used. And these are clickable links again. So for instance, under staff training, we've got an Auckland Libraries webinar that Auckland Libraries have shared with us that they used with their staff to help them be aware of the issues. There's one for school library staff, because there are different issues and processes that might be involved in different people who can support school libraries. We've got a guide for call centre staff. So some public libraries, the first point of contact from someone complaining might be to a call centre. So this is designed as something that can be used to help prepare your call centre staff. And also frontline staff, of course, a really important one. We know all our frontline staff, not everyone's been to library school. This gives them ideas about what they might expect, what they might need to do, and where to get help in dealing with the issues. Collections librarians are often the ones who might be writing the policy. They might be the ones looking after the process of reviewing any complaints to the collections and responding directly to customers. So there's a guide for them. And then lastly, we have this frequently asked questions, which ideally we'll be keeping updated as people ask us more questions. And that is the toolkit. And as I said, some of that, quite a lot of that is things that we hope you'll be able to print out, but otherwise there's lots to read there. I'm now going to hand over to Marlies, who's going to look in more detail at some of those tools.
Okay, we're in the in the room with each other, so just slide over. Okay. So tēnā koutou katoa, ko Marlies toko ingoa. And for today's session, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what processes you should ensure your library has in place for managing challenges. You can find most of what I'm going to cover today in the section of the toolkit that's called Check Your Processes. So everything I'm talking about today I drew from the toolkit, so don't worry if you miss any note taking, you can go back to the section and find all the information in there. So starting off, what is a challenge? Broadly speaking, a challenge is any attempt to censor, remove, or restrict access to something in the library's collection, service offering, or output. Most commonly, this refers to books, but it can also include anything your library offers: e-resources, e-books, DVDs, magazines, content from a streaming service your library subscribes to, such as a film on Beamer Film, and also things like displays, posters, events, groups your library is hosting, and things you put on social media. A challenge can also come from anyone, from members of the public, from an individual, a group or an organization, a protest, and can be received in person, by email, phone call, or on social media. But why do people challenge content that is in libraries? Challenges reflect people's beliefs about what they think is right, wrong, and harmful. These beliefs might be specific to a person's culture, religion, upbringing, or their own ideas. When thinking about challenges, you can also use words like complaints or censorship. Crucially, though, a challenge occurs when a person attempts to impose their views on what they think is right, wrong, and harmful onto others. They're trying to determine what others can access based on their beliefs. The opposite of this is accepting and tolerating ideas that we find wrong, harmful, offensive, which are core principles of freedom of information that libraries stand for. In order to effectively manage or deal with challenges, your library needs a process. Imagine that you're a library assistant working at the desk and a patron approaches you exclaiming that they think a book is offensive and they want it removed. Or imagine you're a library manager and you receive an email from a local group complaining about a display and they'd like you to take it down. What do you do in these instances? Having a clear process will ensure you know what to do and is necessary for effectively managing these situations. Firstly, a process empowers staff to know how to handle these situations. Challenges can be stressful and confronting and may trigger reactivity in staff. After all, challenges are essentially about morality and people's beliefs in what is right, wrong, and harmful. And it can be confronting when these beliefs challenge your own. When confronted with the situation at work, it empowers staff to know what the process is for managing challenges and enables them to activate that process and stay in control of the situation. Secondly, a process supports the democratic principles that libraries represent. Libraries are inherently democratic organizations that align themselves with principles of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of access to information. In principle, libraries advocate against censorship and discrimination and support a diversity of ideas and inclusion of their communities reflected in their collections. These decisions are based on professional considerations and not by political, religious, or moral views. So, aligning with these democratic principles, libraries must also acknowledge and respect the voices of the public who are giving them feedback. Demonstrating that you have a process and that you acknowledge their feedback makes the public feel that their voice is heard, which upholds our status as a trusted public institution. Your library's process for managing the challenges should cover 4 main stages, and this should be documented as a guiding process that links in with your wider policies. So the 4 stages are, and we'll go into these in a bit more detail, is a way for the challenger to submit the complaint, a review process for staff reviewing the complaint, a reply to the patron with what decision your library has made on the complaint, and a record of the challenge occurring. So the first stage is having some sort of channel where the person can submit their challenge or complaint. This could be a paper form that you hand over to them at the desk to fill out, an email address to send an email to, or an online web form to fill in. Most importantly, though, your frontline staff need to be aware of this stage so they can activate the process. This first stage is a crucial de-escalation tool for an in-person challenge. It allows your staff member to carry out a course of action which deflects away from any reactivity or defensiveness they may be experiencing, and also gives the challenger an outlet for their opinion or request. So I've included here a template from the National Library about what a paper form might look like. So this is on their website under their Services to Schools platform on the page called Complaints About Library Items. And you can see they've asked for the contact details of the challenger, what resource they're challenging, what they find objectionable, what they would like done with it, and also interestingly, they've asked if there's anything positive in the material. So the second stage is reviewing the complaint. Ensure that you have dedicated staff whose job it is to review challenges. Perhaps this is the library manager or a collections librarian, or maybe it sits with a sole charge librarian. This process should also include an escalation point, depending on the severity of the challenge. For example, if communication with the challenger is going back and forth without resolution, if any threats are being made, perhaps the media is getting involved, you might want to consider escalating the complaint higher up. Feedback about the library's offerings needs to be reviewed and a decision made on challenges. The process for reviewing a challenge will involve your collection policies, so ensure that you have these up to date or have the policies if you don't already have them. The collection or the collection development policy will be your main source for linking your decision to. Likely, your policy will stipulate that your library aligns itself with principles of freedom of access to information, that it doesn't censor based on causing offence, and will say something about collecting for a diversity of viewpoints and opinions and being reflective of the diversity of its communities. Regularly reviewing your policies will ensure that they are relevant and up to date. You can also make sure that they're aligned with your governing bodies, so perhaps the council or the school board, with their strategic plans, and are also in line with the values of the communities that you serve. Having robust policies is the key to defending and justifying your collection decisions and the services that your library offers. After all, libraries do make decisions about what is and is not in the collections. Your policies will determine how these decisions are made and will enable you to justify your decision to the challenger. So the toolkit has some other sections on policies, which gives you lots of links to other organisations' policies in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also abroad. The National Library also provides guidance on writing policies. There's also links to official statements that are put out by organisations like IFLA, ALA and LIANZA, which can also inform your policy creation and what decisions that you make on challenges. So we're not going to go into depth about collection policies here. So if you feel like your policies need some tweaking, I'd encourage you to pursue some of the resources that the toolkit links to. So the third stage of the process is to reply to the patron with your decision. This is an essential part of the process to make the person feel heard and demonstrate that the library takes their opinion seriously. Your reply to the patron should include 4 components: And for each of these components, you could draw up a template that you could use to send a consistent message and that you would alter depending on the challenge. So the first stage of your reply is recognition that the material being challenged has been formally assessed. So you could say something like, we have received your complaint about this item, and we have reviewed the book against our collection policies. Secondly, inform the person what decision has been made. For example, we have decided the book will remain in the collections. Thirdly, give the challenger the reason for this decision. So something like, our collection policy stipulates we support a diversity of viewpoints in our collection as written in this paragraph of the policy. We are committed to freedom of access to information and will not remove material because it causes offence to some people. This means sometimes we have books that individuals find offensive. And lastly, refer the person to what other options are available to them, namely referring them on to Te Mana Whakaatu, the classification office. So a response like, we rely on and follow the judgments of the classification office, Te Mana Whakaatu, as to whether controversial material should be restricted or banned. Anyone is free to request a consideration for classification. And lastly, in your process, record the challenge or complaint. You can have a system for doing this, which can be something as simple as a spreadsheet. Ensure that you are keeping track of challenges somewhere where you can see what materials are being challenged and what your responses are. This will help you understand your community and also understand censorship trends. With this information, you can prepare your staff if you're noticing trends and use the information to advocate for services if need be. Having data and evidence of the kinds of challenges your library is experiencing could really help if you're trying to advocate for support from your governing body, the council or the school. Planning for events in your library is another place where you could embed a process to prepare for challenges. Now, if you've been following the news or keeping up to date with library trends, you'll likely have noticed a lot of headlines about protests and disruptions at libraries in other parts of the world. However, many libraries in Aotearoa, New Zealand are also experiencing protests and public disruption, and these are happening even if you don't see it in the news. So when you're planning an event at the library, which includes sharing the event details online or on social media, include in your event planning a check to see if this event may cause controversy. Say, for example, perhaps you've heard about a library in a neighbouring district that experienced protesters at a similar event, or maybe you've seen posters around town that express an opposing viewpoint to your event. In these instances, it's good for staff to be prepared by taking steps to ensure the safety of the staff, the patrons, and the communities that your event represents. So incorporate preparedness into your event planning. Ask questions such as, might this event generate controversy? Anticipating potential protest or disruption, do you need any more staff around that day? Or perhaps increased security presence? Furthermore, is there anyone else who would benefit from knowing that there may be controversy? Perhaps you should escalate the message up to your governing body, the council or the school. Perhaps you should tell the staff who monitor the social media or the complaints channel, or maybe work in the library's call centre if you have one. This helps out your colleagues who may also encounter disruption, but also helps you get allies and advocacy in the case of controversy. So I'm going to read out a quote from an RNZ article, which is from March last year, about a protest that happened at Tūranga in Christchurch, which demonstrates a lot of what we've been talking about. So the quote from the article reads, "The Christchurch City Council said it was aware of planned protest activity and that extra measures were put in place to make sure everyone attending was safe. Council's Head of Libraries and Information, Carolyn Robertson, said that the library was well prepared for any disruption. They had effective security strategies in place and the event went ahead as planned," she said. So it's great to see in this article lots of things that we've been talking about. They've escalated to the head of libraries. They've escalated to a council representative to speak to the media. They're indicating that they were anticipating disruption. They planned for it. They had security presence, and thus the event could go ahead. An in-person challenge, which includes protests and disruption, has the potential to be stressful and confrontational, particularly if the challenges are exhibiting angry, aggressive, or upset behaviour. Furthermore, the opinions and beliefs they are challenging may conflict with your own and trigger upset and defensiveness in you. Being on the receiving end of a challenge may cause staff to become defensive, angry, afraid, unsure, or any other range of reactions. As professional library staff, it's our job to handle challenges in a fair and respectful manner. However, it's imperative to keep ourselves safe, as well as our patrons and our communities. As such, the recommendation for handling an in-person challenge is de-escalation. It may be tempting to argue with the person and try and convince them to change their mind, but this increases the likelihood of further confrontation and risks harm to staff or others. So we're not here to give training on de-escalation, but we can share some general tips on how best to handle challenges in the moment. If you feel you and your colleagues would benefit from de-escalation training, you could ask your managers or governing organisation to arrange this for you. And this is an instance where having a record of the challenges your library is facing could really help you advocate for this kind of support. Imagine if you are wanting to ask your governing organisation or your managers for a budget to get de-escalation training for your staff, and they ask you for justification. It would be really useful to have that data on hand to demonstrate the kinds of interaction staff were experiencing to justify needing that training. So the primary de-escalation tip is to try and remain calm, listen, and give the person time to air their complaint. Often a person just wants an opportunity to express themselves and air their concerns and grievances and doesn't need to take it any further. If you're feeling up for it, you can take this opportunity to explain that libraries have a diversity of views in their collection, we stand for freedom of access to information, and that we don't censor material based on causing offence. Of course, it's up to you to gauge if you feel comfortable having this conversation with the challenger and if the circumstance under which the challenge is occurring is appropriate. Ask the challenger directly if they'd like to make a complaint. If yes, you can activate your process by passing over the form to fill in or the email address to contact. If the person says no to making a complaint, this is still considered an example of a challenge and still needs to be recorded as such. If you feel as though the challenge is escalating, step away from the situation and seek assistance or backup from your supervisor, manager, or security. I've just added in a little blurb here about children and young adult content. We've tried to be broad and generic in this presentation, but items regarding children and young adult are the most frequently challenged. And in this circumstance, the recommendation generally is either that you say to the challenger or include in your response something along the lines of, carers and parents play a major role in guiding their children's reading and library use. Each family has the right to decide which library materials are acceptable for their children and accept that other parents have the same right. And there are more resources that you could look into specific to children and young adult content. So conveniently, a real life example of this happened at my work on Sunday, which I thought I'd demonstrate as a case study. So I've got permission to use this report and I've removed names, locations, etc. So the report reads, staff were at the front desk when a patron came up and said they wanted to complain about a book. He thought it was promoting prostitution. Staff offered to take his name and details, but he refused and said he wanted to talk to the manager. I, as the senior, informed him that there were no managers on site and he would have to come back on Monday if he wanted to talk to one. He said very loudly that he did not want to come back on Monday and he wanted to talk to the manager now. I offered the library complaints form, but he did not want to do that and said it was my job to do so. He wanted the name and phone number of the manager, which I did not give out. The patron was talking loudly in a threatening manner, and I asked him not to talk to me like that. And if he continued, I would have to ask him to leave the library for the day. Other patrons listening also told him he shouldn't talk to staff like that. He refused, and so I went and got security. Security and I discussed what happened, and security agreed to stand behind me while I offered the options again. The patron agreed to fill out the form, but asked me to type it out for him. I did type it out for him, but asked him to press the next and submit buttons to confirm that what I typed was what he said. After we finished, he took out the book because he did not want it to go missing. So that's a great example of all the things we've talked about that we can see in that report. There have been 2 escalation points. The senior on duty has gotten involved, and then they've gotten security involved. They have attempted some de-escalation, and they have activated their process by offering the complaints form. And lastly, they've recorded the incident by sending out this report. So we touched briefly on policies, so I wanted to end by directing you to this section of the toolkit where you can find more information if you think you need to look into your policies further. So I'm going to hand back to Louise now, who's here beside me, who's going to give you an example of recent challenges in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards. So over to you, Louise.
Ngā mihi. Kia ora koutou. I'm now going to talk about an example of a challenged item and what we can learn from it about how interested parties act in their associations and motivations, and how to be prepared for other challenges. Libraries in Aotearoa and Australia have received complaints about having the Australian publication Welcome to Sex in their collection. This seems to be based on a belief that information about sex should only come from parents, and that having the information leads children to sexual activity. In Aotearoa, individuals complained directly to several local libraries about the presence of this book in the collection, or that it was in a children's collection. Various librarians reviewed the book, and all of them made the decision to keep it in their collection, with some moving it to a young adult rather than a children's collection. They all responded to the complainants, explaining the principle and process they used for this decision. Several libraries suggested that if the complainant was not satisfied, they could submit the book to Te Mana Whakaatu Classification Office, who can impose restrictions on access. Someone followed this up and asked the chief censor for permission to submit the book for review. The chief censor does not have to grant this right, but in this instance they did so. They invited LIANZA as an interested party to make a submission to this review. LIANZA argued that the book should remain unrestricted. Our submission addressed expert advice that sex education does not harm children, which is a key focus of what the Films, Video and Classification Act protects against. We described how libraries curate their collections to lead children to age-appropriate content. We quoted Katrina Marsden, who wrote in the Canberra Times, referring to this book, "The evidence is clear that providing such information to young people in an age-appropriate way is a critical protective factor in safeguarding their well-being, and has been shown to act protectively against child abuse, to delay sexual onset and reduce the likelihood of negative sexual experiences." In our submission, we also talked about the difficulty of managing age restrictions in libraries, and the evidence we have from the Into the River saga that having books for young adults age restricted and out of sight reduces borrowing of those titles. The office released their decision in November last year and unusually published the full decision document on their website. The office have been very transparent about the process, as well as very specific in how they applied the legislation. It is interesting to read to understand their role and what the legislation tells them they need to consider. They shared that originally 15 requests were made for the book to be classified. It is likely these were generated by the same group of people. In considering its classification, the office invited the publisher, library associations, the Booksellers Association and Department of Internal Affairs to make submissions, along with the original 15 who'd requested the classification. The office subsequently received over 400 additional emails from members of the public requesting that the book be classified. Again, it seems very likely that this was an organised campaign using a template submission. The original submitter and the many uninvited submitters were calling for a classification which restricts the book. The publisher and the representative organisations, including LIANZA, submitted that the book should be unrestricted. As with other issues currently being debated, there are behind-the-scenes organisations who share information and action ideas to advance their own beliefs and to try and shape public activity and policy around these. As librarians, we uphold principles about keeping information and reading free. Being aware of the environment can help us do so. The toolkit tells you about processes and the legal framework, and this case is a great case study to illustrate those. You will have seen that there is a lot of content in the toolkit. There's a frequently asked questions section as well. But in the meantime, before you get a chance to read more of the toolkit, we welcome your questions about what Marlies talked about, or anything about the toolkit, or where to get help. And we're going to take those questions through the chat. So we'll just have a pause here while you think of your burning questions.
Well, you know, you may have been very thorough in your presentation that there will be no questions, so that's okay. Here, we have a question from Justine Lester. Is there anywhere in the toolkit that assists us when we don't want to add something to our collection, e.g. a donation of a TROS publication?
Got it, Justine. Yes, the section right at the beginning where we talk about some case studies of the sort of challenges we have. There's one about mis or disinformation, and that is uses the TROS publications as a case study and does have some suggestions about what libraries can do. And one of the things that we emphasize is that while anyone has a right to challenge anything that we have in our collection, it is up to libraries to decide what's in their collection according to their policy. So we know we cannot buy every single book. We don't have the budget, we don't have the space to do that. So we are constantly choosing materials that we will purchase. So that there lies one sort of option and answer to that. And the other is that that we really recommend for libraries is that if they do have materials such as that the way that they can give context to it can help people assess what they would be getting in for if they were using that publication, and to think about how the resources that are more reputable and have been fact-checked and are often written by Māori, those publications are privileged and promoted within our collections that can also help address the problem of publications such as the TROS ones. To go back to this other, so Donna is curious about managing social media. We flipped over that very quickly. There is a section on social media, and that can play a really important part, and it's also a way in which we might receive complaints and questions. And so it's really important that the people managing your social media accounts know the right sort of responses, or who they need to talk to about responding on issues of censorship. Yes, the recording is going to be freely available. And so a question there about if you work in a school and don't get the support from the Board of Trustees. So that is something that can happen, and in fact it could be that there are members of the public who want to get elected onto the Board of Trustees to promote their ideas about censorship and protecting children in their eyes. So that's where keeping the principal and the school management committee informed in anything that's happening, and also that both LIANZA and the services to schools can be a great support in dealing with Board of Trustees as well.
So there's another question here. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to say it out? You can answer. Is there a guide for council community boards? In our district, challengers have chosen to take their opinions to community board meetings rather than to libraries directly.
Okay, so we haven't written a guide specifically for them, but it's more about what your library manager might need to do in having materials prepared for your local board. You're quite right that it often will come through, or sometimes they'll communicate directly with the mayor as well. So generally, the local boards will ask council officers then to help them in their response, and that's where it's really good to have your policy prepared, and also some statements prepared, including from that key messages section that we had, so that you can respond and tell people about the reasons and about the policies, and even referring to things like the Human Rights Act to support why it is that libraries need to make that decision, and that it's definitely a management issue and not a governance issue.
Are there any more questions? Perhaps Louise, you might like to talk about the upcoming webinars that follow on from this one.
Okay, so what we've become aware of is that a lot of people don't know much about the legal framework and the role of Te Mana Whakatu, the classification office. And so there's going to be a webinar focusing on that aspect, where we'll have a guest speaker from the office, and we're also organising another guest speaker to talk about those broader principles and things like the Human Rights and Bill of Rights Acts and UNESCO declarations, those sorts of things. And so that will be focusing on that area for people. And there is quite a lot already in the toolkit around that, but it'll be great to hear from some of the people involved in those organisations. And then the next one we want to do after that is picking up on that whole stuff about the disinformation and what we do with materials that may have been deliberately written or written in the past in a way that really does not support principles of te tiriti, for instance, and promotes a view on the history of Aotearoa that we might not agree with. And so we're going to go into that in a bit more detail about what libraries can do in that instance. And we're just working out that program and who might be our guest speakers for that session.
Great. It looks like there's no more questions. You've got, there was something that you wanted to finish off with, Louise?
Got a yes. Just really lots of thank yous. So ngā mihi nui anō to everyone who has helped this endeavour. There's been a lot of work behind it with a lot of people involved. And ngā mihi nui to my fellow committee members on the LIANZA Standing Committee on Freedom of Information, including Steph Collins, who's recently left our committee. And ngā mihi nui to all of you for your interest in attending this session. And so I'm going to leave you with this whakatauki. Ko te manu e kai ana I te miro, nōna te ngāhere. Ko te manu e kai ana I te mātauranga, nōna te ao. The bird that partakes of the miro berry reigns in the forest. The bird that partakes in the power of knowledge has access to the world. Mā te wā.
Thank you very much, Louise and Marlies. That was an excellent session, and everyone saying thank you. I think that was really, really great. And as we'll be putting the recording onto YouTube and making it available for people, it should be out in the next kōrero newsletter that'll be out in a few days. So thank you for joining us today. Mā te wā, everybody from LIANZA. Thank you, and thank you, Louise and Marlies. That's fantastic. Bye.